Welcome to the maiden episode of a brand new podcast on the Midas Touch Network called MissTrial. This is going to be a legal show with two of my colleagues and close friends, Kathleen Rice and Danya Perry. Many of you know me, Karen Friedman Agnifilo, or KFA as many people call me, from Legal AF, that we've been around for a long time. But the three of us are three former prosecutors from different perspectives and different offices, but we've all come together at a later stage in our career. And we now work together and we're doing some exciting things, and we have very unique and interesting perspectives. So we thought we'd come together and bring it to all of you. So we are recording this episode, our very, very first one, on the day that the historic day that the jury has received the case and is deliberating in the case of the People versus Donald J. Trump. And that's being prosecuted by my old office. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a former state court prosecutor. I worked at the Manhattan DA's office for almost 30 years. And by the end, I was the chief assistant DA. I did violent crime primarily when I was a line prosecutor, including sexual assault cases. So, but I've supervised every kind of case under the sun, including white collar cases, et cetera. And I can't wait to introduce you to Danya and Kathleen, who will tell you a little bit about their experiences and what they're doing now and what they used to do before. So let's start with Kathleen. Kathleen, tell us a little bit about your background, which is so fascinating and interesting.
Well, so I'm a homegrown New Yorker. I grew up on Long Island, and I started my career as a lawyer in the Brooklyn DA's office. And from there, I became a federal prosecutor in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. And in 2005, which seems like a lifetime ago, I was asked if I would run for district attorney in my home county of Nassau, which is on Long Island. And I unseated a 30-year Republican incumbent. And I served in that position for 9 years. And then in 2014, I ran for my local congressional seat, which was being vacated by Representative Carolyn McCarthy. And I served for 4 terms, a total of 8 years. So I went there with President Obama, and I was there for the 4 years of President Trump and 2 years of President Biden. So I've kind of seen it all. And now I'm thrilled to be with these two wonderful women, Karen and Danya, at Danya's law firm here in Manhattan.
What exciting experience. Yeah, can't wait to dive into that. Danya.
I'm Danya Perry. I have a little law firm, Perry Law, and am lucky enough to have these two amazing women as counsel at my firm. I started my law career as an associate in big law at Paul Weiss, and I did mostly criminal defense work, and decided I really, really wanted to be a trial lawyer. And so my mentor there, a gentleman by the name of Ted Wells, who's really one of the best of his generation, of any generation, one of the best trial lawyers I've ever seen. It will give you goosebumps to watch him give a jury address. I've seen jurors cry. And so that was very, very tantalizing to me. And as a result of that, I applied to the U.S. Attorney's Office. I also applied to federal defenders, because I just wanted to be on my feet in the courtroom. I got the job offer first at the Southern District of New York as a federal prosecutor. I was there for 11 years. I ended up as chief trial counsel, which was the best job of my life. You get to kind of helicopter in at the last minute on difficult trials, and you don't have to do all the grunt work of discovery and motion practice, and you get to just do the fun stuff. So that was a great job, but unfortunately, I was then promoted to be deputy chief of the criminal division there in SDNY. I was there for 11 years, and it was amazing. And from there, I went into the public sector and the state side. That is where I met another mentor of mine, Kathleen Rice, who was the chair of an anti-corruption commission called the Moreland Commission. She taught me so much how to navigate very treacherous political waters, how to really build an investigation from ground up, how to be a better lawyer and person, and I'm forever in her debt. So we did that for a while, and then I went into I went into private practice as an in-house lawyer. And then I decided I really needed to be on my feet again in the courtroom and be a real lawyer without meaning no offense to in-house lawyers. It was actually an amazing job. So I've kind of done it all. I also teach law. I've taught trial advocacy and prosecution clinic, and now I'm teaching professional responsibility at NYU Law School. So, I've done state prosecution, federal prosecution, in-house, private sector, big law, and now my own boutique litigation practice, which has been absolutely amazing. And again, I kind of pinch myself all the time that I'm lucky enough to get the amazing work that we get and to be able to practice with amazing people like you too. So it's kind of a dream come true. Hope that didn't go on for too long, but I've had a long career and what happens when you're as old as we are.
Well, now you guys can add to your resume podcast co-host, because that's what we are. 3 friends, 3 co-hosts, and we are going to be some version of the 3 of us, sometimes not all 3 of us, are going to be providing content and giving information to people as much as we possibly can. We're very busy, as so many people are. We have other full-time jobs, but we're going to give as much as possible. And right now, what's happening, Danya, this deliberation in this historic case, I think really everybody wants to know and hear from you, because you represent Michael Cohen, the star witness in the Trump case. Tell us everything you can and give us your story.
Well, I'm still somewhat constrained because the case is still pending. It's now with the jury since this morning, and so I'll keep it to some top line thoughts and observations, and then we can certainly talk about the ticky-tacky legal issues. But much has been made of Michael's testimony in this case. He was on the stand for an entire week, really, and it was grueling at times. Just being on the stand, you guys have put on countless witnesses, and you know how much of a toll it takes just the actual grind of being on the stand, even direct examination, right before the rigor of cross. So it was it was a long and arduous road, but he was exceedingly well prepared. I spent a lot of time with him, along with other lawyers from my firm, Josh Kolb, who's a young associate who is absolutely fantastic. And I and others, spent a lot of time going through the paces with him, making sure that we had reviewed every bit of prior testimony, which has been a lot, including, direct in many cases and cross, depositions he's given, congressional testimony, as well as trial testimony. And of course, famously, he's out there a lot. He's got several podcasts, and he gives a lot of TV interviews, and he's a talker. He's written 2 books as well. And so there was a lot of material to make sure that we went through, and that he wasn't going to be, I'm going to use the word caught, but that's the wrong term. It's just prepared. The way human memory works, I don't have to tell you guys, or any human actually, is it's not necessarily linear, and you don't remember every detail, but you remember the ones that stick out. And so we wanted to make sure that he was very in the weeds, and was very on top of all the testimony and statements he's made. And the DA's office also spent quite a bit of time with him, as he testified to, and that really paid off dividends. And he was really solid on direct, which is great, but he was equally as solid on cross-examination and then redirect and recross. So he really stood up great, and that is the result of having been very well prepared, yes, but I certainly won't take all the credit. He's just a good witness in the sense that he's an intelligent guy, and he also has the benefit of having told the truth. So while, of course, he's got a checkered past, also famously, and has lied in the past, this story, he's been very consistent for 6 years. And as the prosecutor said in summation, there was just a mountain of evidence that corroborated him, both documentary and testimonial, and of course, inferences, circumstantial evidence. I mean, all kinds of it. And the prosecutor went through it in painstaking detail. So all those things worked to his favor. And I thought he did a phenomenal job of maintaining composure, which is difficult when you've got someone coming at you the way Todd Blanche came at him. But I think he presented incredibly well, incredibly credibly. And he actually, I sat there front row center for his testimony, and I saw him really connect with the jury. He would just talk to them, not just look at his interlocutor, but speak to the jury. And I saw, I saw them react to that. So,
what's the difference between, can you just explain a little bit what the difference between preparation and coaching? People often think, why should you have to spend hours preparing a witness? Are you telling them what to say? What exactly is that?
Yeah, it's a great question and a great point for people to understand. This isn't a rehearsal. It's not, the prosecutors did not go through with him, question by question, line by line, chapter and verse, what they were going to ask him. They went through general topics, and he testified about that. But this wasn't a memory test or anything like that. It was, so really what happened next, and what was that about, and connecting events and being a narrator. As Josh Steinglass, the prosecutor who delivered the summation, put it, Michael really was a tour guide. He was an insider, right? So he was there the entire time. He was certainly at the center of this conspiracy. And so he was able to give the jury a roadmap and walk them through it. But no, this wasn't practice. This wasn't rote. This wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't canned. It was simply tell the jury what happened with, in a guided way. And I think he, was able to do that in a really linear way that resonated and that made a lot of sense, again, because those are the facts and that is the truth.
Yeah, one thing I just want to add, although there were people in our office that helped prepare him, Kathleen and I were not involved in it whatsoever. And so, in fact, I've never actually had a conversation with Michael Cohen.
No, we haven't.
Yeah, neither have I.
And you and I, Karen, actually really haven't talked about it until now. I think it wasn't necessary, but I think we decided just to put some guardrails on as a super precautionary note. So this is our first conversation. And,
so tell us, what was it like to representing Michael Cohen in one of the biggest cases in the world?
The world.
It was a mixed bag. I'm going to be super honest with you. It was exciting to have that front row seat. It was fascinating, right? There's just, any criminal jury trial is just, an amazing window into some really human drama. The stakes are obviously incredibly high, and you've got 12, members of the general public who are there sitting in judgment. It's truly an incredible system that we have, and you can read tea leaves and you can try and look at their reactions and the way they talk to each other and the way they react to the judge, but you have no idea what's going on in their minds until they render a verdict. Sometimes when they submit jury questions, but even then, sometimes you're surprised when they actually do come back with a verdict based on the questions. So it's just so any jury trial, right, is interesting. This one, obviously, much has been said about its unprecedented and historic nature, and so it felt certainly like the stakes were higher. There was just within the courtroom, there was its own drama, that just the cast of characters who came through some of the interactions, in the courtroom. And so, on that level, it was interesting, to trial lawyers like us, it was just a fun ride. It was also, it was daunting, and it was scary. There was a tremendous amount of pressure on my client. And when you represent someone, and I've represented Michael a couple times now over the past couple years. We can talk about that if you want. The first time I represented him was when he had been thrown into solitary confinement for having the audacity to write a tell-all book about then President Trump. And I filed a habeas petition and a TRO, a temporary restraining order, to try and get him out. And we did in just a couple of days. And so that was my first interaction with him. And so I've gotten to know him very well. I've gotten to really like him a lot and to admire some aspects of what he has turned himself into. And there was just a tremendous amount of pressure, both in terms of, he felt and I derivatively felt, how important this moment is. There were also a lot of threats and a lot of just real ugliness directed mostly at him, but again, derivatively, some in my general direction, just disgusting comments, misogynistic ones, that kind of thing that you don't necessarily sign up for, and you don't try not to let it bother you. But it's scary, right? I mean, there was a massive police presence outside of the courthouse. We had to be escorted in and out. Precautions were taken, and that is because it felt like, and I think this is fair, there was a real threat. So there were just many different human emotions during the course of it. At the end of the day, as a lawyer in the service industry representing a client, my heart is in my throat, watching it unfold and wanting the best interest of my client to play out. I will tell you, I'm sure you both, you're in the arena typically, the two of you with your past, and I have been as well. One of the hardest things that I do as a lawyer is represent just a witness, right? A third party witness, because then you can do all the preparation and you can, there was not, one notable exception, which we can talk about, absolutely almost nothing that we did not anticipate, both in direct and in cross, and the way it all played out. So I feel very, very proud of how we prepared him. But as the lawyer for a witness, you can't get up and make objections. You can't do the redirect. And so you do put yourself a little bit, in the hands of the prosecutor there. And that's hard to do. I really do have to give a shout out to Susan Hoffinger, who was the ADA who put Michael on the stand and who went through his direct and redirect with him. She did really a masterful job of putting everything together, having him weave the narrative in a way that really made sense, which is not that easy to do. And she made some really interesting strategic calls. I thought that we could also talk about if you want. One of them that was really notable, and Karen, I know you'll interrupt me if I'm going on for way too long.
No, I'm enraptured. I want you to take us inside the courtroom, because there's no cameras in the courtroom. I want you to tell us what the one thing is you didn't anticipate. I want you to tell us, I'm not talking for, this is very much a co-equal podcast. There's no host. We're all co-host, right? But Kathleen and I are sitting here listening to every word because it's so fascinating, which I'm sure the audience is going to as well. So please go ahead.
All right. So just to pick up where I left off, the interesting tactical decision she made was to have him walk the jury through a lot of the documentary evidence in real time as he told the jury the storyline, So that isn't always the case. Sometimes a prosecutor will say, okay, so what happened next and what happened next, and just walk us through it. And then, so he would say, on October 24th, I had this conversation. On October 26th, I had this, or maybe not even tie it to those dates, because a lot of times if you're talking about something that happened 8 years ago, you might not remember the exact date. But she tethered him to dates and even to specific hours and seconds and minutes by having him walk through phone records, emails, text messages, logs of calls, and that helped tether his testimony to a timeline. So sometimes a prosecutor won't do that because they want it to be kind of organic. But in this case, I think it worked out incredibly well because he was able to really tell that story in real time rather than have that burden be on the closing statement. The prosecutor delivers the closing statement to tie it all together so that it kind of cohered in the jury's minds as they was walking through the story. The downside of doing that can be that the defense lawyer can then cross on it and say, wait a minute, how do you really remember having this conversation at 8:02 p.m. on October 24th? Like that doesn't have the ring of truth. So it can work both ways. In this ways, I think it worked phenomenally well, with the one notable exception that if you want to talk about that now, we can talk about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
So this has been reported. I'll just say as a prelude. So Todd Blanche is a weirdly just an old good friend of mine. He was my paralegal at the U.S. Attorney's Office and was the lead paralegal in my first criminal trial. And that, so when you're in the trenches with someone like that, you get to know them very well. And then he's actually, there's a lot about him that's super interesting. He's a really smart guy, very affable guy. He went to night law school, came back as an AUSA, rose the ranks, was a chief. And so I've been a friend for a long time. I've seen him do quite a few trials as a prosecutor. So that's a little context. I'd never seen him. This may have been his first or maybe second criminal defense case. And I don't, because he's a friend. I'm not here to trash talk him, and I don't even think I could, because I think he did a very serviceable job with a difficult case that doesn't necessarily have a great counterfactual that he could tell and persuade a jury of. And he also has reportedly a very difficult client who certainly wants his own narrative to get out there and might not necessarily listen to direction from his lawyer. So he had a tough job. He asked a lot of the questions that you both, have heard a million times. There's certain kind of tricks of the trade that you're going to ask. One of them, Karen, is actually a little bit like the question you asked was, so how many times did you rehearse your testimony with prosecutors? Stuff like that. But we all knew that he was going to go through a relatively lengthy history of Michael's, having pled guilty to certain crimes, having admitted to lying, and various other, what you could call prior bad acts, conduct that is, that could make the jury discount his testimony. So he did a lot of that I think different people could think differently about how it landed. I did not think he made much progress. The one surprise was that because the prosecutor had kind of married the testimony to these call records, he had testified about a certain call that happened on a certain day, October 24th, 2016. And he testified that he had spoken with then candidate Trump about the Stormy Daniels deal being done. And that's all he testified to. And on cross, Todd brought out the fact that there was actually a very strong documentary record that suggested that Michael was actually speaking with the president's body man, Keith Schiller, about something else. And that was, the fact that Michael had been getting a lot of harassing calls from a young prankster. And so Todd used that. It was a surprise, right? Because that's just not something that we had talked about, we had seen, and in prep. And it was, so I think there was an element of surprise there. Todd acted like it was a real gotcha moment. Michael came back very quickly and said, well, we didn't have a lot of time. While he was on the campaign trail, there was a lot of business to attend to. He went through a lot of things that were happening in October of 2016. Not surprisingly, it was a busy time. And he said, we talked about both things. And now that you've refreshed my memory, yeah, I remember that prankster. And so I think it didn't land as well as a lot of people talked about it landing. And then I think the prosecutor did a great job bringing out how much can actually be accomplished in a 96-second phone call. And in fact, there was a recording that had already been introduced in the case where Michael and Mr. Trump were talking about payment to Karen McDougal. And the real substantive, they talked about a bunch of things, just like on the October 24th call, but the real substantive piece of it was less than a minute. And so I think that made the point. So I think it ended up being a bit of a clunker, but it did seem like I think the trial's first aha moment. And so, you know, the press tends to go bananas and make much of it. And so that was kind of a, you know, big moment from the trial. But having sat there and watched it, and at the time I was a little surprised too. And I think it ended up getting smoothed over. And the prosecutor also made the point that the reason Todd Blanche had those records and Mr. Trump had those records was because Michael Cohen had turned them over. So he had voluntarily provided those records over to the DA's office. So no one was trying to hide anything. It was just simply, you know, and Michael said this, you tend to remember the really important things. And that payoff to Stormy Daniels was really important. That 14-year-old prankster, much less important. So maybe it wasn't top of mind in his direct testimony. So that was, you know, that was, I guess, a moment when you could hear, it's funny sitting in the courtroom, it's generally pretty quiet, but when there's a moment, you just hear, you know, clackety clacks of all the press on their computers.
On their computers, yeah.
It's crazy.
Take us, what else can you tell us about being in the courtroom? First of all, was it as cold as Trump? Was it an icebox?
I'm always cold. And so I had read about that. And so I layered. I had several layers of like just old lady shawls. And, you know, I actually almost put like a winter coat on. But I was so close to the jury and it was obvious I was his lawyer and I didn't want to embarrass him or anybody. So I kept it together. No, it was tolerable. I think maybe that was meant to keep Mr. Trump awake more than anything, which did not work particularly well, if that was the point of it. There was some heat in the courtroom, just, you know, metaphorical heat, right? There were a lot of, after Mr. Trump had been chastised, you know, for the last time and threatened with incarceration if he kept violating the gag order, he decided to then bring in his surrogate. So he had, you know, just a parade of former colleagues of Kathleen's and others who would come in a kind of revolving door fashion and sit there and make noises and faces and then go out and make speeches. And so, you know, it's a small courtroom filled mostly with press, very few members of the general public that I could tell. I think you had to get there, you know, at the crack of dawn to get one of the coveted free, you know, spots. So it was small, very contained. I mean, I you know, sat directly next to, you know, members of the Trump family and members of Congress. And, you know, Alina Habba had to be excoriated on at least one occasion that I saw by the courtroom deputy when she guffawed. It was actually at that aha moment by Todd Blanche with the October 24th call. So she had done that with abandon at the trial where she was the questioning lawyer for the Attorney General civil fraud trial. That kind of conduct, those kind of outbursts were just every day, you know, par for the course kind of conduct in that courtroom, but that was not allowed in Justice Merchan's courtroom. He really ran a very tight ship, and generally people were pretty respectful. The jury certainly had a lot of regard for him. You could see them nodding every time he just gave those standard courtroom instructions as they were leaving for the day or before lunch. Don't talk to anyone about the case. Don't keep an open mind. they would just nod along with him. And so they really liked him and follow the rules, which is a thing, as you both know, prosecutors are looking for. They want people who will follow the judge's instructions, and who also seem to get along well with each other, which I did observe as well. They were all very polite with each other. They would make room for each other to, walk past each other. They would, talk. They would make jokes. Little. I mean, they're very professional seeming jury. Generally, did not react in an overt way, but you could tell they had a good rapport with each other, which is something a prosecutor, we were talking about reading tea leaves, they really look for. They want to see that, they generally can get along with each other and can work with each other. So that a couple of my courtroom observations for color.
Yeah, it's interesting as trial lawyers, we all know that jurors really look up to judges. They're the ones who protect them. They're the ones who are not advocates. They're not one side or the other. They're the ones who really, they look up to them like they're going to be the one to kind of tell them how to be and what to do. And I'm not surprised they feel that way about Judge Mershon. I've appeared before him many, many, many times, and he's just a really good, solid, down the middle, kind of calls balls and strikes. He's got a very even temperament. He's not a screamer. He's a great judge. He's great for this case, and he kept great control over the courtroom. And so speaking of that, while we are sitting here, breaking news, there is a jury note. And so when there's a jury note, what happens? So they were charged this morning by the judge, and they went into the deliberation room, which is a small little room behind the courtroom. It's got a rectangle table in it with chairs all around it, just like 12 Angry Men. It's got 2 bathrooms in it and a water cooler. And that's it. May or may not have windows, depending. And if they want something from the court or from the judge, they have to buzz a buzzer and send a note. And that's exactly what they did. And it said, "We, the jury, have 4 requests." It says, I love how formal they are. "We, the jury." Wow. It's adorable. I know. "We, the jury, request David Peck." Yeah, exactly. David Pecker's testimony regarding his phone conversation with Trump, Pecker's decision not to finalize and fund the assignment of McDougal's life rights, Pecker's testimony regarding the Trump Tower meeting, and Michael Cohen's testimony regarding the Trump Tower meeting. Now, okay. Let's do the reading the tea leaves. We're the prosecutors in the room, and we are, we get the note and we're like, oh my God, what does that mean? Are they going in chronological order? Are they concerned? Is this good for the defense? Bad for the defense? I mean, what do you guys? Either one of you, what do you make of these? Let's read some tea leaves.
I have a strong view, but Kathleen, you
well,
always
I would say I'm not surprised that they want to hear from these 2 witnesses. They arguably were probably the most relevant human testimonial witnesses regarding Trump's state of mind, what he knew, what conversations he was present for. And so I think that, makes sense that that is what the jury would want to hear about. But I would defer to Danya in terms of Michael Cohen's specific testimony about whether it dovetailed with David Pecker's on that Trump Tower meeting, or how you think that is something that they want more clarification on or want to hear more about.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think this is just very basic. It really goes to, that Trump Tower meeting is where the prosecution pegged kind of the beginning of this conspiracy. And I think this is a serious jury who's taking their responsibilities very seriously. And that's exactly where they should start. It doesn't necessarily mean this is good for the prosecution, although I would say it is. But it is certainly a sign that it's a responsible jury that is, going to go through the order of proof and see how it matches up with each other. And so I think the testimony, I haven't parsed through it, and that's exactly what the parties are doing right now, to see how those two pieces of testimony match up. But my strong sense is it matches up quite well. And by the two pieces, I mean, obviously David Pecker's testimony, Michael Cohen's testimony about the Trump Tower meeting in August of 2015. So I think they'll nod their heads and say, okay, that kind of makes sense. And then they'll probably move on. This seems to be very methodical. They're starting at the beginning, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see other notes as they kind of go through the chronology. Karen,
yeah, I mean, one thing to keep. Yeah, well, a couple of things. Number one, I've learned that you can't really read tea leaves. So, for example, this could be one juror once, it could be, you can't say, oh, this means the jury believes the prosecution's case, or they haven't all rejected Michael Cohen. It could be one juror feels.
Although they did say we, the jury. And very but I agree with you.
Yes, that is true. That is true. Sometimes, though, the rest of the jury wants to use this information to convince other jurors, right? So they all want the information. But anyway, I agree with you. It shows, if nothing else, it just shows they're taking it seriously. They haven't bought into either, that Michael Cohen is the MVP of liars and you can't believe anything and reject the whole case, or the other way around. They haven't said, okay, I hate Donald Trump, and the way he says it's the way he tries to politicize the jury just because it's in Manhattan, that, they're just out to get him. This shows that they're taking it seriously and they're evaluating the evidence, which is exactly what they should be. And I think it's important that we all accept the verdict, no matter what it is, and not politicize the jury system. I believe in juries. We all believe in juries. It's the one thing we have left, that Donald Trump hasn't delegitimized, or at least attempted to, and to do that to the jury system. I mean, he goes after Juan Merchan, the judge, who's actually a great judge. He goes after prosecutors and calls them political. That's his sort of go-to thing when it's not necessarily true. And certainly it's not true when it comes to juries. So I think this is a great thing just for the system and for legitimacy of the system, that they're evaluating the evidence, which is exactly what they should be doing. That is what their job is. So to me, that's what it means. It's way too early to tell. People are like, oh, we're going to get a verdict today? No way. Not in a 34 count case that took, 23 days of testimony and I think it was 7 weeks of trial. I mean, there's no way they're going to have a verdict right away. I think we'd be lucky if we had a verdict by Friday. We might not even have this readback by the end of the day, because they only have another hour of deliberations. Now what they're going to do is the court reporter is going to have to identify the places in the transcript that are responsive to these four areas. Everyone's going to have to agree, because now it's not like they're just asking for the entire readback of a particular witness. They have to locate where in the transcripts is responsive to this question on both direct and on cross. That could take an hour. And then they have to come in and be read that portion of the testimony, and then continue deliberating. So this could go on for days. It could go on for weeks. So it's way too soon to tell.
No, I completely agree. Yeah, they're going to be fighting until the end of the day about exactly what parts of testimony, and then cross, and then redirect, and all that is going to be responsive to the no. So hopefully the jury is continuing to deliberate while they wait for this. It could be a wait. I agree.
Yeah. I also think it's important to point out to people that, every day they get an instruction from the judge that says, don't read anything, don't talk to anyone about this case. And, you believe that the jurors listen to what the judge says and they do what he or she says. And so it might be the general public and all of the media pundits who are talking about what's going on in their mind, but they are clearly, from this note, very focused on the evidence that they heard. And that's what they're going to ultimately, base their decision on, which is a good thing. To your point, Karen, before about, accepting the verdict and hoping that the general public accept the verdict, whatever it is, whether you want Trump to be acquitted or you want him to be convicted. It's important that, the very genesis of a lot of this, the recent conflict in this country is accepting the results of an election, accepting the results of a trial are just as important because it's all part of a strong democratic system.
Speaking of strong democratic systems, Kathleen, what was it like being one of the branches of government? I mean, the fact that you were a member of Congress is just, you're just so incredibly impressive. You were, everyone talks about, you were the number 2, assistant DA, blah, blah, blah. You were the number 1. You were the elected official in the Nassau County DA's office, which is a major, major district attorney's office. And then you were a member of Congress, Congresswoman Rice. And it was during the Trump administration. I mean, you got to share some stories and what it was like.
My God, there are so many stories, and Danya certainly has heard them because she went through those 8 years that I was there with me. Look, I always say it's an incredible honor to be an elected official. To have the public put their trust in you is something that I never betrayed and I always honored. Being the first woman DA elected in 2005 was pretty amazing too. I actually couldn't believe that it was the first time that a woman had ever served in the role as DA on Long Island. And we were able to do some really great things. But I also saw that, when that congressional seat was open, I thought, if I want to complain about the way things work in Washington, which I did in my position as DA in Nassau County, I should be willing to throw my hat in the ring. And I did that and I won. And so I remember going into, Washington, showing up there in January of 2015 and meeting all of my colleagues. And it was Obama's last 2 years and thinking to myself, wow, this is, I, of course, wanted to be as bipartisan as possible, but it was really the beginning of the hyper-partisanship from my experience, because then 2 years later, Trump came in. And remember, when he was elected, Republicans had control of the Senate, the House, and the White House, which is a really unique position for a new president to be in, because they can take advantage of having control over all 3 houses and make sure that they get their political agenda, their policy agenda passed, because they control all levers of government within the legislative branch. So that was a pretty interesting time. And I will say that, there were times when I disagreed with Donald Trump, and there were times when I worked on him specifically with the criminal justice reform, that he, was a strong issue for his administration. I believe it was driven by his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. But Democrats got on board because it was something that needed to be done. So there was still an aura somewhat then that we could work together. But by the time I left, I decided not to run for re-election in 2022. It had gotten so bad that it was just an impossible place to be. And I felt like it was time, another complaint that people have of politicians is that they get elected and they never leave. And I thought 8 years was enough, and that there was someone else that could do that job after me. And to be honest, I'm glad I'm not there now. When I look at some of the things, the conversations that people are having, these are elected officials, and the way that they're talking to each other about fake eyelashes or I don't know what. It's just, it's very depressing, and it'll be interesting to see what happens here. And with this election, I should say with this verdict, and then of course, 6 months from now with the election, because we do have a very divided country right now. And I'm hoping that maybe this could be the beginning of moving past this certain period of hyperpartisanship. I hope it's not exacerbated. I think I'm being a little Pollyanna-ish by hoping it's going to be make things better. But it was interesting to be there with Donald Trump, who I knew from my time as DA. He supported me when I was DA. So when people say, "Oh, he's a MAGA this," I said I was a Democrat as the DA, and he supported me financially. He supported my re-elections. He was a pretty bipartisan guy because he was a real estate magnate in this city of New York who understood that you should support all of your elected officials. And so he was pretty magnanimous back in those days. That obviously quickly changed. But I do want to say one thing about, how dangerous it is for people to just follow along blindly behind whomever it is, whether it's Donald Trump or anyone else. Because when you have a bunch of members of Congress, former colleagues of mine, most of whom I know, coming down to Lower Manhattan and saying that this is a witch hunt and a banana republic and the legal system is being politicized, that's really dangerous rhetoric in the face of evidence completely to the contrary. I've had a very interesting career where the law and prosecution has intersected with being a politician, a legislator. And again, just so fortunate to have been able to serve the public in this way. And I hope that we can get back to public service being about that, being actually about serving the public as opposed to serving the individual political careers of, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican.
Wait, where were you Jan 6? Were you in Congress?
Oh my God. So two of my closest friends in Congress were Senator Kyrsten Sinema and Representative Stephanie Murphy from Florida. Senator Sinema from Arizona and Stephanie Murphy from Florida. And it was going to be a long night of votes. So we brought what we called a go bag, because they had told us that they were afraid that maybe there was going to be some protest activity outside the Capitol on that day, because that was when we were going to be certifying the election results. And so we went to work. We went to work that day looking like we were going to school with backpacks and dressed in, sweatpants and sweatshirts and baseball hats, and then got dressed in our offices. But we were actually in Senator Sinema's hideaway, which is in the basement of the Capitol, which was just below where they were able to first penetrate and break into the Capitol. They broke through the glass and invaded the Capitol right above there. And
wait, what's a hideaway?
So every senator, that's right. I'm sorry. I should. So every senator, there are only 100 of them, 2 from every state. They have what's called a hideaway in the Capitol. And it's a little office that they can go to instead of having to walk all the way back through internal tunnels. There's a whole tunnel system in the Capitol. So you have the Capitol in the center, and then you have tunnels that go out across the avenues that get you directly to 3 individual office buildings, 3 on the House side and 3 on the Senate side. So you never have to go outside. During the winter, we all had vitamin D deficiencies because we would never go outside. You would take the tunnel everywhere, to hearings, to the floor to vote, to your office. So every senator has what we call office hideaway. And Senator Sinema's was in the basement of the Capitol. And that's where we were going to go and just, eat some dinner, and just relax and wait for votes to be called and go back and forth and back and forth. And actually, Senator Sinema never made it there. She was, I believe, had just spoken on the floor right as they were breaking in. And so they were evacuated to an undisclosed location. And ultimately, the Capitol Police came and got Stephanie and myself and brought us to where the senators were being kept until they were able to clear out the Capitol. So it was pretty scary times. And when I hear some of my colleagues talk about it was just another day at the office with, tourists coming, saying hi to people. It was anything but that. I mean, it was truly frightening because they were out for blood. I mean, everyone remembers where you were. It's one of those days that you remember. It's like, where were you when 9/11 happened? I remember exactly where I was. Everyone does. And I think most people probably remember where they were that day as well on January 6th.
Yeah, that's just incredible. And it sounds terrifying.
Yeah.
Wow. That just sounds terrifying. When did you realize how bad it was?
It's so funny because Stephanie and I look back now and Cinema and we're like, was our head? I mean, we had no idea it was going to get that bad. The Capitol Police, I never felt not safe in the Capitol complex. I never felt unsafe in my office, my official office. But I think everyone underestimated, and I didn't know what was going on at the Ellipse with Trump's with his call for people to march down Pennsylvania Avenue and go, basically to take this election back. I mean, I guess we have to, it made me appreciate the rhetoric, however fiery and incendiary it is, from people who should know better talking that way. But everyone that was there at the Ellipse listening to President Trump speak that day, and Rudy Giuliani and all of those kind of people, they took their words seriously, and they marched down Pennsylvania Avenue and pushed past barricades and Capitol Police officers, physical injury, death. It was awful. I think it was when we were walking through to get to Cinema's Hideaway, and a Capitol Police officer said, "Ladies, where are you going?" And we said, "Well, this is where we're going." And he said, "Get in there right now, shut the door, turn the light out, do not turn the TV on, and don't make any noise, and lock the door and put a chair up against the door." And I thought, wow, oh my gosh. I didn't even, and this was early on, they had not broken in yet.
Like, don't turn the TV on because they don't want, and the light on because they don't want anyone to know that there are people in there.
Yeah, they did not want, there was one Senator, Patty Murray, who was in her hideaway, which actually had windows in it. And some of the people who were breaking into the Capitol were banging on her door, and she was in there with her husband, and his feet, he was pushing against the door. I mean, we saw her later after we were brought to where all the senators were being held. And that poor woman looked like she was in a state of shock. I mean, they would have taken anyone who was an elected official. They were calling out Mike Pence's name. They were calling out Nancy Pelosi's name. Didn't matter. Republican, Democrat. They wanted someone. They wanted to get someone. And poor Patty Murray and her husband were, locked in her hideaway until they were able to go get her. And it was just, so when I hear people talk about January 6th this way, I get personally offended. I mean, my life was in danger. I don't talk about it because I was ultimately safe and was rescued. But it really just gets me when I hear former colleagues of mine who were there on that day, as petrified as everyone else was, now talking about it like it was just another day at the office.
Yeah. Or you hear Donald Trump going and visiting the January 6th people who are convicted and calling them patriots.
Calling them patriots and calling them. Yeah. I mean,
and calling prisoners of war and people who serve losers. Yeah. Right. I mean, I couldn't believe Memorial. I was watching stuff on Memorial Day about things that Trump had said about people who serve. And he called, remember what people who are prisoners of war, he called them, he's like, I like people who weren't captured, and anyone who died, in service is a loser. I mean, just really, really sad, horrible, dangerous rhetoric that is going around. So, wow. Well, Kathleen, I didn't even know this about you. But it dawned on me as we're talking. I was like, wait a minute, you were there. That you were a member of Congress that day.
It was crazy. I mean, it never occurred to me to not accept the outcome of an election. And I say to myself, was I happy that Donald Trump was elected president? No, I didn't vote for him, but I accepted the fact that that is what the people in this country, that's who they elected. And we move on. Doesn't mean that, you get to say, let's storm the Capitol and not accept the results of this election. I am petrified. If you look at all of the people who on the Republican side who are considered potential VP candidates, and they are asked, every single one of them have been asked by some journalist or another, are you committing to accepting the results of this election in November of 2024? And the way that they triangulate themselves to get around answering the question and just saying, of course I'm going to accept the outcome of the election. They won't say that they will. And the havoc that will wreak if after this election, Joe Biden is reelected and Donald Trump is not. We saw it on January 6th. I hope that we're far enough away from it for people to just say, okay, enough is enough. We're going to accept the outcome of this election, regardless if it's someone that I wanted to be elected or not. But if we can't do that, that's that's really where we're going to be in trouble in this country, because if we can't have open and fair elections that are accepted by the general public, we're no different than any other country that doesn't call themselves a democracy.
Wow. All right. Well, I'm sorry that I have to wrap this up on that note, but I think we all have to run and go do our other jobs. But I'm so excited about this new adventure with the three of us. I can't think of anyone else I'd rather do it with than you two, who I absolutely admire and adore, and feel so lucky that you are my colleagues. And I genuinely mean that. So anyway.
I agree.
Anyway. All right. Well,
Thank
you so much. And we'll be back.
We'll be back.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Midas by signing up to the Midas Touch newsletter at MidasTouch.com/newsletter.